This week the theme is prayer with the saints, and this involves, of course, the Mother of the Lord as well as the saints. The Mother of the Lord needs no introduction, but the word saints has undergone changes of meaning. In the apostolic letters by Paul and others, the word is used to mean believers who are a work in progress, being sanctified. This sense reappeared in some American spirituals, and when the saints go marching in, it's all Christian believers. But perhaps starting with martyrs, those whose lives displayed qualities of holiness or generosity or something outstanding were recognized as someone special. In time, of course, fame also played a part, and others were acclaimed as saints. The background to the episode I want to describe begins with a devout and formidable middle-aged Roman Catholic lady who described to me her first visit to Russia. It was in 1953, the year that Stalin died. She visited a Russian Orthodox church. She was stunned. She said, "I felt that I myself had never learned how to pray." She came back to England inspired and founded the All-Night Vigil Association. And she had the vision of holding an all-night vigil in Russia. After developing the movement in England, some 12 years later, she started to plan for Russia. Roman Catholic travel firms did not have any contacts with in-tourists, and so she negotiated with interchurch travel. I was one of their guides and had been into Russia before, and so I became involved. I will skip the preparations and prayer. We were to spend only 5 days. It was not a holiday, and the vigil was to be held in the St. Sergius Monastery of the Holy Trinity at Zagorsk. There were problems, but somehow 44 Roman Catholic laity and clergy with an Anglican administrator set off. The Catholics were wonderful and very supportive to me, and the senior priest was the spiritual leader. But he and I had shared in the preparations, and we worked together very, very well. The first 2 or 3 days involved discreet acts of prayer in Red Square and the icon room of the Tretyakov Museum. When the evening came before the vigil, and we were taken to the monastery about 40 miles northeast of Moscow, we were shown into the seminary chapel, and we started our vigil. There were short services and silences. During one of them, the senior priest invited me to explain the layout of an Orthodox church. In the silences, I began to study the ceiling. There was a painting or a fresco of the Mother of the Lord holding a stole or perhaps a veil in her 2 hands, so that the ends fell down towards the ground. It was called the covering, or pokrov in Russian. There had been a sort of Dunkirk moment some centuries before in a siege of Constantinople, and a monk or a hermit had prayed very fervently, and the invaders moved away or fled, and it was interpreted as the protecting prayer of Mary, Mother of Jesus. Russia had a violent history, and many churches were dedicated to the protecting veil of Mary. Seeing this painting all through the night made an impact on me. The night was the eve of the festival the Catholics call the Assumption, the Orthodox call a little more cautiously the falling asleep of Mary. After the vigil, we were led over ostensibly to see the grave of the founding abbot, but in fact we were led to the liturgy, where there were maybe about 2,000 people. The singing was very powerful. One of our two Soviet guides was absolutely stunned. It was a Russia she had never seen. I asked her if I would be allowed to use my tape recorder. She said, interestingly, "Here you must ask the priest." I was given permission. Eventually, the recording was used by the BBC on their Russian service. The vigil by the Catholics was significant historically. The Russian priest said that the last time Catholic hymns were sung there was by the Polish troops besieging the monastery early in the 17th century. In our last evening, which was a lovely one, many of the pilgrims took a boat down the Moscow River. The crosses on the Kremlin churches were at a different angle to the Soviet stars on the wall. The evening sun lit up the crosses and the stars were in shadow. For some of us, it was a symbol that although for many hours of the day the cross was, as it were, in eclipse, for 1 hour the crosses were shining. The life of the Church of Christ would go on and could not be extinguished. After we had returned to England, one Catholic newspaper had a heading, "The cross still shines over Moscow." Subsequently, the leading Catholic priests gave an account to the Pope. For me, it became one of the ways of intercession prayer for others, picturing the stole draped as cover on either side of the person for whose protection you were asking. I had been brought up in a fairly straightforward Protestant tradition. There are objections by some that to pray for the protection of Mary bypasses Jesus. But in the reading we heard about the wedding in Cana of Galilee, when people asked Jesus' mother at the wedding, she told them, "Do whatever he tells you." She holds the child in another icon tradition of Mary. The infant Jesus is called the pointer of the way. She holds the child in the left arm and points to the child with the right one. She always directs attention away from herself, but she does honor those who obey the teaching of her Son. In the preface, in the communion service in the Anglican Church, for a Saint's Day, there's a strong sense of the dimension of the believers beyond at our church here on earth. And this sense of togetherness can be felt quite widely. Even George MacLeod, with his Presbyterian background, when working in Iona, sensed some link with St. Columba. He described it as a very thin place. But it can happen, of course, that the support you receive through the saints is a disciplining one, not just a comforting or reassuring one. The words of the preface in the communion service. "And now we give you thanks that your glory is revealed in all the saints. In their lives you have given us an example of their faithfulness to Christ. In their holiness we find encouragement and hope. In our communion with them we share the unity of your kingdom. Amen."